The large, dome-shaped chamber was dimly lit, with only a few overhead lights casting a pale glow over the proceedings. In the center of the room, a solitary figure sat strapped to a metal interrogation chair, their body covered in a series of strange glowing nodes and electrodes. This was the last of the human prisoners, the final captive from the disastrous first contact mission that had ended in such tragedy. The Yiner Thule, a highly advanced alien civilization, had responded to humanity's overtures of peace and cooperation with suspicion and hostility. Their interrogation techniques were brutal, designed to extract information through intense physical and psychological distress. But despite days of relentless questioning, the human captive had revealed nothing. Their mind was a fortress, impenetrable to the Einar Thule's most sophisticated telepathic and neural probing techniques. The Einar Thule were growing increasingly frustrated, their initial confidence in their ability to break the human's will now shaken. Suddenly, the heavy metal doors at the far end of the chamber slid open, and a tall, slender figure entered the room. It was one of the Ynar Thule, their unnaturally elongated limbs and glowing, faced eyes marking them as a member of the ruling class. The Ynar Thule approached the captive, its movements smooth and graceful. It circled the chair, studying the human with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "You have proven to be most resilient," the Ynar Thule said, its voice a deep, resonant hum. "Our methods have failed to extract the information we require. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach." The captive remained silent, their gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the alien's presence. The Einar Thule paused, considering its next move. "You know, we have been monitoring your species for some time. We are intrigued by your capacity for both great violence and profound compassion. It is a fascinating dichotomy, one that we have not encountered in our dealings with other civilizations." Again, the captive said nothing, their expression betraying no emotion. The Einar Thule leaned in closer, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You have proven to be a most worthy adversary. Perhaps it is time we understand you better." With a gesture, the Ynar Thule summoned a smaller attendant alien who quickly approached the captive's chair and began adjusting the various devices and electrodes connected to the human's body. "We will try a different approach," the Ynar Thule said, its voice tinged with a hint of anticipation. "One that may prove." The attendant finished its preparations, and the Ynar Thule nodded, signaling it to begin. Suddenly, the room was filled with a low, pulsing hum, and the captive's body began to tremble as the devices activated. The human felt a strange sensation, a tingling that seemed to spread from the nodes attached to their skin, coursing through their veins and into their very core. It was not painful per se, but deeply unsettling, a feeling of their mind and body being probed. The Einar Thule watched intently, its eyes glowing with a strange, almost predatory fascination. The human's thoughts and memories were laid bare, their innermost secrets and experiences now accessible to the alien interrogators. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the Einar Thule delved deeper into the human psyche, exploring the complex web of emotions, beliefs, and experiences that made up their consciousness. The captive's brow furrowed, their breathing becoming labored as the alien presence within their mind grew stronger. Suddenly, a shift occurred. The Ynar Thule's once confident demeanor began to waver, its glowing eyes widening with a mix of surprise and something else. It was as if the human's mind was revealing something the alien had not expected, something that challenged its very understanding of the world. The attendant alien glanced nervously at its superior, unsure of what to make of the Einar Thule's reaction. The chamber fell silent, save for the steady hum of the interrogation equipment and the captive's labored breathing. Then, without warning, the doors to the chamber burst open and a new figure strode into the room. This one was unmistakably human, their features and bearing instantly recognizable to the captive. It was Major Sarah Alvarez, the commanding officer of the ill-fated First Contact mission. Her eyes were narrowed, her expression a mix of determination and barely contained fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. The Yinar Thule turned, its composure regained, and fixed Alvarez with an unreadable gaze. "Major Alvarez," it said, its voice calm and measured. "We were not expecting your involvement in this matter." Alvarez's gaze shifted to the captive, and her expression softened for a moment, a flicker of relief crossing her features, but it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "Release them," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The Yinar Thule hesitated, its glowing eyes flicking back and forth between the human captive and the commanding officer. "I'm afraid I cannot do that," it said, its voice tinged with a hint of regret. "This individual possesses information that is vital to the security of our civilization. We cannot simply release them." Alvarez's jaw tightened, and she took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Then I'm afraid you've left me no choice," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The Yinar Thule raised a hand, its long, slender fingers glowing with a faint, ethereal light. "I would not recommend such a course of action, Major Alvarez," it said, its voice laced with a subtle threat. "You are severely outnumbered, and your primitive weapons would be of little use against us." Alvarez's eyes narrowed, and she took another step forward, her body tensing as if preparing for a fight. "Try me," she said, her voice little more than a whisper. The Yinar Thule regarded her for a long moment, its glowing eyes seemingly weighing her words. Then, with a slight nod, it gestured to the attendant alien. "Release the captive," it said, its voice calm and measured. The attendant quickly moved to the captive's chair, deftly disconnecting the various devices and electrodes. The human captive, their minds still reeling from the alien's intrusion, slowly rose to their feet, their gaze fixed on Alvarez. Alvarez stepped forward, her hand reaching out to gently grasp the captive's arm. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. The captive nodded, their expression a mix of relief and confusion. Alvarez turned to the Yinar Thule, her eyes narrowed. "What was the meaning of this?" "Interrogation," she demanded. The Yinar Thule regarded her in silence for a moment, its glowing eyes unreadable. "As I said, this individual possesses information that is vital to the security of our civilization," it said, its voice calm and measured. "We were attempting to extract that information." Alvarez's expression hardened, and she took a step closer to the alien. "And what gave you the right to imprison and interrogate one of my people?" she snapped. The Yinar Thule's gaze shifted to the captive, and Alvarez could have sworn she saw a flicker of uncertainty in the alien's eyes. "Your people have proven to be unpredictable," the Yinar Thule said, its voice tinged with a hint of wariness. "We felt it necessary to understand you better." Alvarez's jaw tightened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but the captive's hand on her arm stopped her. "Major," the captive said, their voice soft and calm, "I think we need to talk." Alvarez's gaze shifted to the captive, and she could see the unspoken plea in their eyes. With a reluctant nod, she turned back to the Yinar Thule. "Very well," she said, her voice low and controlled. "We'll talk." The Yinar Thule nodded, a faint glimmer of satisfaction crossing its features. "Excellent," it said, its voice tinged with a hint of triumph. The Yinar Thule turned and began to lead the way out of the chamber, the captive and Alvarez following close behind. As they walked, Alvarez couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The Yinar Thul's actions had been puzzling, to say the least, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. But for now, her priority was the safety and well-being of her people. Whatever the Yinar Thul had discovered during their interrogation, she was determined to find out and to do whatever it took to protect her people. The trio made their way through a series of dimly lit corridors, the Yinar Thul leading them to what appeared to be a more private, secluded area of the facility. Finally, they arrived at a small, circular chamber, its walls lined with a number of strange glowing consoles and displays. The Yinar Thul gestured to a pair of chairs in the center of the room, indicating that Alvarez and the captive should sit. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," it said, its voice calm and measured. Alvarez and the captive exchanged a cautious glance, but reluctantly took a seat. The Yinar Thul moved to one of the consoles, its long fingers dancing across the glowing interface. "As I'm sure you've gathered," the alien said, its back still turned to them, "our initial attempts to extract information from your people have not been entirely successful." Alvarez felt a surge of anger, but the captive's hand on her arm once again stopped her from speaking. "What do you mean by that?" the captive asked, their voice surprisingly steady. The Yinar Thul turned to face them, its glowing eyes almost. "Your mental fortitude and resilience have proven to be most impressive," it said, its voice tinged with a hint of admiration. "We had not anticipated the depth and complexity of your lives." Alvarez frowned, her confusion evident. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice sharp. The Yinar Thul hesitated for a moment, its gaze shifting between the two humans. "During the interrogation process, we were able to glimpse the true nature of your species," it said, its voice soft and thoughtful. "The depth of your emotions, your capacity for both love and hatred, your boundless curiosity, and your ability to adapt and overcome even the most daunting of challenges." Alvarez's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward in her chair. "Get to the point," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The Yinar Thul met her gaze, its own expression unreadable. "It is clear to us now that your species is far more complex and fascinating than we had initially believed," it said, its voice tinged with a hint of wonder. "And we wish to understand you better." Alvarez opened her mouth to speak, but captive beat her to it. "What are you saying?" the captive asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The Yinar Thul turned its attention to the captive, its glowing eyes seemingly filled with a newfound respect. "We wish to forge a new relationship with your people," it said, its voice calm and measured, "one based on mutual understanding and cooperation." Alvarez stared at the Yinar Thul, her expression a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "You've got a funny way of showing it," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Kidnapping and interrogating one of my people." The Yinar Thul nodded, its gaze shifting to the floor. "Yes, our initial approach was misguided," it admitted, its voice tinged with a hint of regret. "We did not fully understand the depth of your emotional bonds and the importance you place on individual autonomy." Alvarez opened her mouth to speak, but the captive's hand on her arm once again stopped her. "What are you proposing?" the captive asked, their voice calm and even. The Yinar Thul looked up, its glowing eyes filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "We wish to extend an invitation," it said, its voice filled with a hint of anticipation. "An invitation for your people to join us in AE. Shared exploration of our respective civilizations." Alvarez's eyes widened, and she leaned forward in her chair. "You're asking us to what, exactly?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. The Yinar Thul held up a hand, its long fingers glowing with a faint, ethereal light. "We are proposing a cultural exchange," it said, its voice filled with a sense of excitement, "an opportunity for our two peoples to learn from one another, to share our knowledge and our experiences, and to forge a new partnership." Alvarez stared at the Einar Thule, her mind racing. This was not at all what she had been expecting, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. "And what exactly do you hope to gain from this partnership?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. The Einar Thule's gaze shifted to the captive, and Alvarez could have sworn she saw a flicker of uncertainty in the alien's eyes. "As I mentioned, your species has proven to be fascinating to us," it said, its voice soft and thoughtful. "We wish to understand you better, to learn from your unique perspective and experiences." Alvarez frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Understand us better," she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "By kidnapping and interrogating one of my people?" The Einar Thule nodded, its glowing eyes filled with a hint of remorse. "Yes, our initial approach was misguided," it admitted, its voice filled with a sense of regret. "We did not fully comprehend the depth of your emotional bonds and the importance you place on individual autonomy." Alvarez's jaw tightened, and she leaned forward in her chair, her eyes narrowed. "And you think that simply extending an invitation is going to make up for what you've done?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. The Einar Thule hesitated, its glowing eyes shifting between Alvarez and the captive. "We understand that our actions have damaged the trust between our peoples," it said, its voice filled with a hint of resignation. "But we are earnest in our desire to forge a new relationship, one built on mutual understanding and respect." Alvarez stared at the Einar Thule, her mind racing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief and cautious optimism. Could this really be an opportunity to learn more about these enigmatic aliens, to bridge the gap between their civilizations? She glanced at the captive, whose expression was unreadable. They seemed to be weighing the Einar Thule's words, their brow furrowed in deep thought. Finally, the captive spoke, their voice calm and measured. "What exactly are you proposing?" they asked, their gaze fixed on the Einar Thule. The Einar Thule's glowing eyes seemed to brighten, and it leaned forward, its long fingers gesturing expressively. "We would like to invite a small group of your people to join us here, on our homeworld," it said, its voice filled with a sense of excitement. "We would provide them with accommodations and resources to assist in their exploration and study of our civilization." Alvarez's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward in her chair. "And what would you expect in return?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. The Einar Thule met her gaze, its expression unreadable. "Simply an exchange of knowledge and understanding," it said, its voice calm and measured. "We have much to learn from your people, and we believe that by working together, we can uncover new insights and possibilities that neither of us could have imagined alone." Alvarez stared at the Einar Thule, her mind racing. This was a far cry from the hostile, antagonistic encounter she had been expecting. The alien's words seemed genuine, and the prospect of a genuine cultural exchange was intriguing. But she couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. After all, the Einar Thule had already demonstrated their willingness to resort to extreme measures in their pursuit of information. Alvarez continued to scrutinize the Einar Thule, her expression a mix of skepticism and cautious interest. "And why should we trust you?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "After what you've done to our people." The Einar Thule met her gaze steadily, its glowing eyes filled with a sense of sincerity. "We understand your hesitation," it said, its voice calm and measured. "Our initial actions were misguided and have no doubt caused a great deal of mistrust between our peoples. However, we are genuine in our desire to forge a new relationship based on mutual understanding and respect." Alvarez leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed over her chest. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've already demonstrated your willingness to resort to extreme measures to get what you want." The Einar Thul nodded, its expression somber. "You are right to be cautious," it said. "Our actions were regrettable, and we acknowledge that we have much to do to earn your trust. But we believe that this cultural exchange represents a genuine opportunity for our peoples to come together, to learn from one another, and to forge a lasting alliance." Alvarez glanced at the captive, who'd been silent throughout the exchange. Their expression was pensive, their brow furrowed in deep thought. "What do you think?" Alvarez asked, her voice low. The captive met her gaze, their eyes filled with a mix of uncertainty and "I think," they began, their voice soft and thoughtful. "I think we should at least consider the offer." Alvarez's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest. But the captive raised a hand, silencing her. "Major, I know you have your reservations," they said, their voice calm and even. "But I can't help but feel that this could be an opportunity to bridge the gap between our civilizations, to learn from one another, and to perhaps prevent future conflict." Alvarez stared at the captive, her expression conflicted. She knew they had a point, but the lingering sense of mistrust and resentment towards the Einar Thul made it difficult for her to fully embrace the idea. Finally, she sighed and turned her attention back to the Einar Thul. "All right," she said, her voice reluctant. "We'll consider your offer, but I want to make one thing clear. If anything, and I mean anything, happens to the members of my team, I will hold you personally responsible." The Einar Thul nodded, its glowing eyes filled with a sense of understanding. "I can assure you, Major Alvarez, that the safety and well-being of your people will be our top priority," it said, its voice solemn. "We will do everything in our power to ensure that their time with us is safe, productive, and enriching." Alvarez studied the Einar Thul's expression, searching for any hint of deception. But to her surprise, she found only sincerity and a genuine desire to make amends. With a reluctant nod, she turned to the captive. "All right, then," she said, her voice resigned. The captive nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of their lips. "Thank you, Major," they said, their voice filled with a sense of relief. Alvarez returned the smile, though it was tinged with a hint of apprehension. "Don't thank me yet," she said, her voice low. "We still have a lot of work to do." The Einar Thul nodded, its glowing eyes filled with a sense of renewed purpose. "Excellent," it said, its voice filled with a hint of excitement. "I will make the necessary arrangements immediately." With a gesture, the Einar Thul summoned a pair of attendants who quickly approached the humans. "Please, allow these individuals to escort you to your accommodations," the Einar Thul said, its voice calm and measured. "We have much to discuss in the days to come." Alvarez and the captive exchanged a wary glance, but they nonetheless followed the attendants out of the chamber, their minds racing with a mix of trepidation and anticipation. As they walked through the dimly lit corridors, Alvarez couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The Einar Thul's offer was intriguing, to be sure, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. She glanced at the captive, who seemed lost in thought. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice low. The captive turned to her, their expression thoughtful. "I'm not entirely sure," they admitted, their voice soft. "But I can't help but feel that this could be an opportunity to bridge the gap between our civilizations, to learn from one another, and perhaps to prevent future conflict." Alvarez nodded, her expression contemplative. "I understand your reasoning," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of reluctance. "But I can't help but feel that we're walking into something dangerous." The captive met her gaze, their eyes filled with a sense of determination. "I know you're worried, Major," they said, their voice calm and even. "But we have to at least try. We owe it to our people to explore every possible avenue for peace and understanding." Alvarez sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I suppose you're right," she said, her voice resigned. "But I want you to know that I'll be keeping a close eye on things. The slightest hint of trouble, and we're out of here. Understood?" The captive nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of their lips. "Understood," they said, their voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. As they approached their accommodations, Alvarez couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. She knew that they were venturing into uncharted territory, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that this could be the start of something extraordinary. As Alvarez and the captive entered their accommodations, a sense of uncertainty hung in the air. The weight of the decision they had made weighed heavily on their minds, the future uncertain and fraught with potential danger. Yet, there was also a glimmer of hope. The possibility of bridging the divide between their civilization and the Einar Thule, of learning from each other in ways never before imagined. It would not be an easy path, Alvarez knew, but for the sake of her people and the future of both their worlds, she was willing to take that risk. With a deep breath, she turned to the captive, her expression resolute. "Let's see what the Einar Thule have to teach us," she said, her voice filled with a cautious determination. "Who knows? It might just change the course of our history." The captive nodded, their own face reflecting a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Together, they stepped further into the unknown, ready to embark on a journey that would test the limits of their understanding and the very nature of their existence. The future, for better or worse, was now in their hands.